What trends in the innovation of tall building design interest you most right now? Maybe something you've heard at this conference, maybe something that's been on your mind.
I feel challenged in many disciplines that are the collaborative disciplines that make a high-rise work. In particular, we're finishing up the Lotte 123-story tower in Seoul. Structural issues are really beyond my comprehension, so to be at this conference and to dip into some of the talks and hear what people are thinking is fascinating. But I think for myself and what we can do as designers at KPF at the moment, the subjects of the tie-in of the high-rise to public infrastructure, the spatial designs really rather than the technical designs, how to make a tall building a piece of urban design. I think it might sound like a very self-evident ambition and kind of, well, without that one shouldn't have a high-rise, but actually many of the great high-rises that we are fascinated by and respect are really objects planted in the ground without the kind of proliferation of public space that really should, ideally, accompany such a massive, dense building. So to see what others are accomplishing, and that varies, of course, such a great deal from city to city, context to context, because what we call public space and good urban design and the opportunities to work beyond the site vary hugely from London to New York to Hong Kong to Shanghai, Seoul, et cetera. But that would be my subject, would be public space, urban design, and how the horizontal gives rise to the vertical rather than the other way around.
What do you think horizontal design or any projects like the ones you alluded to that do this well, what do you think they can teach the new vertical cities that we're trying to build, that we're talking about at this conference?
The paradigm, I think for many of us, and certainly for New Yorkers, is Rockefeller Center, so we're going quite a ways back, but it really was a partial realization of a much more visionary set of concepts. Harvey Wiley Corbett drew amazing multi-layered kind of fantasies of space that probably will never be achieved. And then in his work with others, with Hugh Ferris, with Raymond Hood, you know, there was an ounce of that went into Rockefeller Center. So I think if one uses that as a kind of a model for urban decorum, for the kind of space that city dwellers really like to dwell in, and then look and see to what degree can we find inheritors of that tradition. Perhaps in Tokyo, the two major projects there, Roppongi Hills, as well as the project that Skidmore has done more recently, are fascinating because the coming together of culture, art, commerce, the workplace, the residential building, the truly mixed-use kind of recipe, and then the mixing chambers of space that happen down at the base. At Tokyo Midtown is the one I was referring to earlier. Okay. I think those are great examples. Many others, but those just happen to come to mind.
Could you talk about porosity a little bit and the idea of public space integrated throughout tall buildings? Tall buildings being a part of the urban fabric, as you mentioned earlier?
Well, it sounds kind of like a foregone conclusion or just a natural desire. Why wouldn't one want a lot of open space at the base of a very, very dense building? But it's very hard to achieve, and that's, I think, in part because of the economics and politics of building. Sites for tall buildings generally are in highest dollar per square foot, yen per square foot, pound per square foot zones. Giving up anything at the ground floor is a major battle. So from a practical point of view, or point of view of the diplomacy of architecture and the negotiation of architecture in real project circumstances, to be able to carve away space that complements rentable space, but probably deprives somebody of a profit, has to be done with the greatest of resolve and the knowledge that it's really going to pay back. Also making spaces that people feel comfortable in next to very, very large structures, modulating scale from tall to middle to small to ground. Is something not always made easy or possible by zoning or by structure or other circumstances. So again, I think there's some new projects that are in the offing now in our office and elsewhere that are very much thinking along these lines.
Could you tell us about one or two?
Well, one is the Lotte project, which is kind of well known because it's been talked about and published, but the built project is a year away. And in that case, having a concert hall 10 stories in the air, on top of a podium, which is a few million square feet, next to a tower of 2.5 million square feet, the quantum of horizontal, or let's say traditional city scale 10-story building that balances or works in a symbiotic way with the super tall structure is quite unusual. And in that case, it took us as a firm a kind of a battle to get the commission to do the base, which wasn't really part of the tower, but it was our conviction that this was the second half of a novel that needed to be written all at once, not in separate pieces. We'll see how it comes out, but it's a way of making the vertical city more than a fiction or a conceit of a sketch and a drawing or a diagram, but allows people to spend significant amounts of time in the first steps of the foothills before you get up to the mountain, so to speak. I think that's going to be a great project.
KPF's worked all over the world, and you have. Is that idea of public space and the idea of privacy and public space integrated all throughout one building in a high rise, is that different from region to region? So much so that you might need to consider that? Has that come up?
I think it is. I think it's a bit of a cliche maybe, but certain cliches there's truth to them, or generalizations have some truth to them. That in the fast growth markets, or the markets where, in the cities and the cultures where economies have been growing so strongly consistently over the past 20 years, and the margins for profit are, I would think, not being really on the business side of things, but we witness it being sizable. Where the rewards are large, the risks can be large too. We're not whittling away there at the last 1/10% of some utility to make the building finally cross over some threshold in the pro forma to fly. So I think in Chinese cities, some large projects in Shanghai, in Seoul, in Hong Kong perhaps. One of my partners, Rob Whitlock, has done a very fascinating project in Hong Kong called Hudson Place, where there's a sort of a series of escalators and stairways and program piled on top of program to bring retail high up into the building. So I think that's something that was very hard to imagine happening in New York. But one of the projects which my partners, Bill Pedersen and Paul Katz, are working on right now related with Steve Ross in New York, Hudson Yards, borrows from that paradigm of retail going up more than 4 stories, of sky decks being more than only an observation point and having more events attached to them. So the extent to which there is a vertical city there, and all of it built over train tracks with a deck, so it's really a kind of an artificial ground no matter where you look at the ground plane. That brings a certain measure of this to New York in a daring way, and I think it's by virtue of experience, track record of other projects and other designers and other developers in other parts of the world outside of New York. So we benefit from that sort of global exchange of experience.
And Hudson Yards connected to a new theater.
Yeah, I think the Culture Shed, which is this Diller Scofidio Renfro project, is going to be one of the more talked about, celebrated, and interesting pieces of contemporary architecture as this transformable venue where the whole structure of equivalent of, let's say, an 8-story building, as far as I know, but major open volume or large contiguous volume can roll on railroad track like guide rails with some sort of technology that allows it to bear a building and scissor its way out into a plaza, covering it and making it into a sheltered space. So that sort of indoor-outdoor redefinition of the porous and the solid, because typically we think of solid as enclosed and porous as outdoors. That's, a great addition to the repertoire of this kind of space making in large, tall building cluster like projects.
Yeah.